Good morning. It is Friday, October the 4th, and this is The Drill. Thank you very much. I'm Ron, your host, the only true conservative in the United States today because I'm the only one who makes the presumption for the status quo. My podcast is about being a true conservative and using true conservatism to beat the left each and every day. Broadcasting is my calling, and I podcast not in a search for popularity, but because I have something to say. My podcast is made possible by Spreaker.com. It can be heard on iTunes, Spotify, Google, and YouTube. My email address is storytimes@hotmail.com. I am on Twitter at Ronald Hardgrove and on Facebook at The Drill. I started my socio-political odyssey as a conservative Republican, and then I became a card-carrying member of the Libertarian Party, and I'm now a registered independent and true conservative. I was taught by the left how to dress, how to act, what to take seriously, and who to associate with. When I decided to vote Republican, I thought that I could act like a liberal, but vote conservative, and still consider myself a conservative. I was wrong. Whenever I engaged a liberal in debate, I couldn't win. And I couldn't win because I couldn't be taken seriously and because I didn't understand the debate dynamic between left and right. I talked conservative, but I acted left. I used lefty lingo, I dressed like the left, I engaged in petty vice, and associated with people who engaged in vice. People who used drugs, gambled, consorted with prostitutes, stole, and cheated. I failed to recognize that the debate dynamic between psychology, things that are imaginary, and philosophy, things that are real. I failed to recognize that the debate dynamic was between psychology, things that are imaginary, and philosophy, things that are real. And it was no wonder that people around me didn't take me seriously, so I realized that defeating liberals and socialists starts with getting my act together, by not only voting conservative, but by talking, dressing, and acting conservative. By refusing to associate with common criminals and ne'er-do-wells, by being aware of and resisting left-wing counterculture, and by using my intellect to defeat psychological bullying and intimidation, I will not only win, I will never lose. And the purpose of my podcast is to share with my audience the lessons I've learned on how to defeat the left each and every day. Today, I will explain why we are failing to rehabilitate the chronically mentally ill. I will read Chapter 2 from the book titled Impeachment, a Handbook, New Edition by Charles L. Black, Jr., and I will pick up where I left off, reading Chapter 4 of A False Kind of Christianity by Dan Jensen, covering subjectivity and objectivity. All that when I come back. Thank you very much. We assume that the mentally ill are in anguish and in a desperate search for medical treatment. What if we are wrong? What if the mentally ill are high? Normal people take LSD, psilocybin, and other hallucinogens to do what? Go insane? No, to get high. What if the mentally ill person's psychotic episode is a high? Wouldn't that explain why the mentally ill seem to defy rehabilitation? Decades ago, didn't we treat alcoholics and heroin addicts as medical cases? And isn't it true that these individuals began to improve only when they were treated as addicts and forced to accept responsibility for their addictions? I believe that if we look at and treat the insane as addicts, we will see dramatic improvements in their lives and be more successful in keeping them off the street. I suggest MIA, Mental Illness Anonymous. And so when I come back, I'm going to be reading from the book about impeachment by Charles Black, Jr. Thank you very much. Welcome back. There is so much talk on the left and right about impeaching President Trump. I thought it would be a good idea to present a historical perspective on impeachment. The chapter that I'm about to read is from a book written in 1974 during the Nixon administration, and it was written for citizens to inform them about impeachment and the impeachment process. This is Chapter 2, The Procedures. General. The procedures of the House of Representatives and the Senate are highly technical, but most of this technicality is irrelevant to essential understanding. Let us consider in broad outline the processes of impeachment and removal. Strictly speaking, impeachment means accusation or charge. The House of Representatives has, under the Constitution, the sole power of impeachment. That is to say, the power to bring charges of the commission of one or more impeachable offenses. These charges are conventionally called articles of impeachment. The House impeaches by simple majority vote of those present. The Senate tries all impeachment. It determines on evidence presented whether the charge in each article of impeachment is true, and whether, if the charge is true, the acts that are proven constitute an impeachable offense. Such an affirmative finding is called a conviction on the article of impeachment being voted upon. A two-thirds majority of the senators present is necessary for conviction. This two-stage procedure is borrowed from the British model, impeachment by the House of Commons and trial and conviction by the House of Lords. It is also analogous, obviously, to the two stages in traditional English and American criminal law, indictment or charge by the grand jury and trial by another jury. The articles of impeachment correspond to the counts in an indictment presented by a grand jury. The Senate's vote on individual articles, one by one, corresponds to the trial jury's separate verdict on each count of the indictment. This two-stage procedure has obvious merits in criminal practice and in impeachments. In criminal practice and in impeachment, it assures consideration of the evidence by more than one body and screens out, at the first stage, insubstantial or clearly unprovable accusations, so that the public and private trouble and expense of a full trial are avoided. In all instances where the first or charging body, in the case of impeachment, the House of Representatives, finds nothing worthy of full dress treatment. The part of the House of Representatives. Let us now take a more detailed look at a procedure in the House of Representatives. Although the Constitution does not require it, the House has always employed one of its committees, usually the Judiciary Committee, to investigate and report on charges that might lead to impeachment. In the presidential case in our times, several resolutions seeking impeachment were referred to the Judiciary Committee for full investigation and recommendation. In only one instance in our history has impeachment ever been voted by the House of Representatives without an affirmative committee recommendation. The committee to which this task is confided must hear evidence, great masses of it, in a complicated case. At this stage, it seems certain that no technical rules of evidence apply. Indeed, I shall argue later that they do not apply even in the Senate trial. Evidence may come from investigations by committee staff, from grand jury matter made available to the committee, or from any other source. Testimony before the committee and the production of documents or other objects may be compelled by subpoena, which is an order for appearance or production under the threat of criminal penalty. In addition to evidentiary matters, the committee must also consider whether the acts shown probably to have been committed are impeachable within the meaning of the constitutional text, of which more will be said in Chapter 3. What part is to be played at this stage by lawyers of the person under the investigation would seem to rest in the sound discretion of the committee. Where the committee concludes on the facts and on the law that one or more impeachable offenses are shown with sufficient clarity to justify trial, the committee reports to the full House of Representatives its recommendation that one or more articles of impeachment be adopted. When this recommendation reaches the full House, it might conceivably be amended, but this is politically unlikely. It is just possible that the House might vote to drop one or more articles of impeachment, but next to impossible that any would be added, because an article added against the recommendation of the committee that had heard all the evidence would stand on dubious ground in the Senate and in the country. The House will almost certainly not hear any more evidence, but will vote, after debate, on the question of whether to impeach or not, voting on all articles of impeachment together or on each separately. As a variation on this procedure, the committee may generally recommend impeachment, and if the House votes to follow this recommendation, the matter would be referred back to the committee for the drafting of articles. These would then have to be voted on by the whole House. An affirmative vote by the House sends the bill of impeachment with one or more articles to the Senate for trial, just as a grand jury indictment with one or more counts goes to the trial court and jury for final determination of guilt or innocence. A majority of the House of Representatives, 218 members out of 435, constitutes a quorum, so that with a majority present, business can be transacted. Since a vote of impeachment is by simple majority of those present, articles of impeachment might theoretically be voted by 1/4 plus one of the full membership. In fact, it is unlikely that many members would ever absent themselves from the vote on a presidential impeachment. Such an absence would be hard to explain to constituents. And that is at least part of Chapter 2 of Charles L. Black Jr.'s book, Impeachment, a Handbook, New Edition. Remember that the left is always bluffing, so that the best response to any lefty that tries to taunt you with the prospect of impeachment is, impeachment? We dare you. Back in a minute. Thank you very much. Now I'll continue with Chapter 4 of A False Kind of Christianity, a conservative evangelical refutation of progressive Christianity. When I left off yesterday, I'd covered subjectivity and objectivity. I will now read the sections titled Systemization and Faith and Certitude, the fourth and fifth ways that the lefties try to get around reality. Systemization. The next way many try to wriggle around the first principles and the conclusions that spring from them is to argue that when it comes to the highest truths, we are dealing with mysteries, and it is impossible to systematize, create a system for a mystery. Hence, it is said, we really cannot know a great deal about ultimate truth, at least not in any concrete, systematic way, precisely because, as was said, mysteries cannot be created, no system can be created for a mystery. This is another very common ploy amongst those that adhere to a postmodern philosophy, or at the very least, very much in line with a great deal of postmodern concerns. For this reason, this is an accusation I have repeatedly heard and read lodged toward the truth by progressive Christianity advocates. The fact of the matter is that any articulation of knowledge is engaging in some degree of system building. This is simply how the human mind works. There's no question that sometimes we have to be more systematic than at other times, but we are always, at all times, creating systems. And when we are articulating our positions on something important, we are morally obligated to present that articulation in the most organized, coherent, simple, and clear fashion possible. To do otherwise is to create confusion, and to intentionally create confusion for one's own purposes is deceptive and evil. As far as mysteries are concerned, all of life is mysterious to one degree or another. I don't care if we're talking about Twinkies, there's always some degree of mystery involved. Now, of course, many things are far, far more mysterious than other things, but that does not change the fact that our knowledge of everything is always very limited and involves a tremendous amount of mystery. And the more mysterious something is, the more caution we must use in trying to explain the content of that mystery. God is, of course, the ultimate mystery, and all of our articulations of knowledge of Him must be extremely cautious. This is because not only is He the most mysterious being in existence, He is qualitatively different than all else in existence in the most extreme sense imaginable, because He is infinite and all else is finite and contingent upon Him. However, none of this changes the fact that whatever knowledge we can have of God must be explained in the most organized and orderly way possible so that it can be best understood. Again, when people argue otherwise, they are simply looking for a way to justify their very confused, vague, opaque, and usually contradictory viewpoints concerning God. This is unacceptable. Mystery is certainly a pervasive part of life. Christian evangelicalism has always fully recognized and accepted the reality of mystery, despite the fact that we are so often accused of not doing so. Where we do not know something, we need to be honest about that. And while we need to try our best to look for answers, we also often have to be content with the fact that we may never know. What we can never do is take mystery and use it as a weapon whereby we try to cause people to doubt those things we can know. We can know many things, and we should never make the excuse that we cannot know these things. And these things that we can know should be explained and taught to others in as systematic a fashion as is required by the given subject. And that was systemizing, the section of chapter 4 called systemizing. And this section is faith and certitude. The final crucial area that we will examine, where many try to skirt the first principles and the conclusions that come from them, is to argue that we cannot prove religious truth in any way because religious truth is based on faith and is therefore antithetical to certitude. This is a completely erroneous view of faith. The term faith can be used in two different senses. It can mean simple belief in the truth of something, or in the sense of trusting someone or something. Here, we are only interested in the first sense. We should not believe in anything, religious or otherwise, unless the evidence supports it. To believe in anything without evidence is actually credulity, not faith. Now, it is, of course, true that it is perfectly fine and necessary to tentatively or provisionally believe in many things based on solid but not definitive evidence. But in these cases, this is not absolute belief. It is simply provisional or tentative belief, as was stated. With that said, we should not believe in anything absolutely unless the evidence definitely proves it. Certainly, many of the things we believe religiously, we only believe provisionally. But to also say that the core of our religious belief should only be provisional is woefully incorrect. The core of our religious knowledge forms the beliefs that we need in order to be fulfilled. When it comes to these things, we need certainty. Now, many will argue that if faith is certain, it is not faith, and there would be nothing praiseworthy about it. Again, though this represents a terrible misunderstanding of faith, one that is unfortunately shared to some degree by many Christians today and throughout history. The fact of the matter is that we often struggle terribly to believe many things because either something seems incredible or because it is something that rattles what we want to be true. We often want things to be true for emotional or moral reasons. Hence, the meritorious nature of faith depends on what is being believed. Believing that I exist on some level is not all that praiseworthy because despite its difficulties on some level, for the most part, it is not a very challenging thing to believe. However, believing in the Holocaust, on the other hand, is an extremely hard thing to believe. It seems far-fetched on the face of it that one small group of zealots could kill so many people so fast and in such inhumane ways. It staggers the mind and smacks of exaggeration. But anyone who has studied the historical data is constrained to believe that it did happen, because it did, and we know that it did, based on the overwhelming evidence. To believe in the Holocaust, in spite of our instinct that humans just do not normally act like this, is very meritorious because it involves believing the truth irrespective of the enormous difficulties involved. Not all religious truth is difficult to believe, but for the most part, true religious knowledge forms the content of our potential knowledge that is by far and away the most difficult to believe. I have the hardest time believing in Adam and Eve, the Garden of Eden, angels, demons, Satan, the Tower of Babel, Noah's Ark, the parting of the Red Sea, many other biblical miracles, hell, predestination, and most of all, the fact that God became man in order to redeem mankind. Who can believe such fantastical claims? But as Christians, believe we do, because God has shown us beyond doubt that these things are true. Therefore, I take nothing away from the grandeur of faith by making it clear that we can and must know religious truth with as much certainty as we know anything else. So, this book is important because it talks about the influence that the left has and is attempting to have over one of the most important aspects of American culture, namely the church. Chapter 4 is important because it demonstrates the foundations of not only Christianity and all intellectual endeavors, and shows you how the left attempts to subvert those foundations. The systemization and faith and certitude sections of chapter 4 are important because they accurately describe the efforts of the left to subvert Christianity. Back in a minute. Thank you very much. And who is the... Well, let's do this first. Thank you. In conclusion, I've proposed a new approach to assisting the homeless mentally ill. I've read Chapter 2 from the book Impeachment, a handbook, new edition by Charles L. Black, Jr., and read the sections on systemization and faith and certitude from Chapter 4 of A False Kind of Christianity, a conservative evangelical refutation of progressive Christianity by Dan Jensen. Who is the true conservative? He's the person that understands that conservatism is not just about politics, but culture as well. He acts like an adult. He is patriotic and uses common sense. He makes judgments, refuses to speculate, speaks clearly and definitively, and is not afraid to say no. He is open-minded, asking why rather than why not. He is consistent, credible, and influential, not ashamed of his existence, unafraid to learn or correct his mistakes. He is a normal American and better than the socialist. He is a better friend, father, brother, family member, and a better person, period. And that brings me to the conclusion of another episode of The Drill. Remember that the left has no authority, no power, and they can't win. True conservatives will never join their movement, and we will not shut up. Thank you for listening, and have a great day.